As we begin the course, we'll start with the beginning. Chapter 1, Overview of Business Ethics. Uh, I mentioned some and before, some things about it. The reason you're taking it is because it's required, or else you would be just off messing around this summer. And it's required in AACSB programs and some others because AACSB requires it. That's the reason we teach it. That's the reason you take it. And why that is will become evident as we move along. So what is it? Everybody thinks that they're ethical, right? There's not a soul that's viewing this right now that thinks, oh, I'm not ethical. Hopefully there's not, right? But ethics are not just right and wrong. As the second bullet point says, deals with questions of whether practices are acceptable. Some things are acceptable in certain industries and not acceptable in other industries. Sometimes gift giving to your customer, for example, is acceptable. Everybody does it. To your congressman or senator, you're not supposed to do that, and they're not supposed to take it, right? Even though you mean no harm. So there's not one single way to look at it, to look at ethics and ethical situations. Like most everything in life, there are a lot of gray areas. There's nothing in life that's always right or always wrong. Some of you may be thinking right now, oh, yes, there is. Murder is always wrong. And I agree with you that murder is bad. But if my daughter required insulin or she was going to die and the person that had it wouldn't give me any, I might be pressed into some violent behavior to get it for my daughter so that she wouldn't die. And I might feel I might be able to justify that. All right. So as an example, luckily she's not a diabetic. Let's hope that never happens until the zombie apocalypse. So the definition, which are always good things to know: principles, values, and standards that guide behavior in the world of business. So values and judgments are critical. And where do we often learn those? From those closest around us, right? As when we're young, our parents or the family we're living with or the people closest to us, they establish these things that they're norms, right? They say, well, this is the way normal people act. They don't cheat, they don't lie, they don't steal. You can trust me. If you set the house on fire the third time, there has to be some accountability involved. And of course, those are values. Principles, if you think about the Constitution, they're enshrined in the Constitution that we have freedom of speech, we have civil liberties, freedom of expression, and those types of things. So principles, values, and standards, which we will hit on in a little bit or throughout the course, really. And these are the things that kind of guide us in life, and they should guide us in business, because business is like life. Business is not something that you step into the workplace at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning and all of a sudden it's a cutthroat racket. You forget everything else the way you've lived, and you operate completely differently. That shouldn't be the way it is. It's not a zero-sum game to be played. So if you work somewhere, you can probably relate with this slide. That nearly half employees observe misconduct in the workplace. What's misconduct in the workplace? Well, it could be, have you ever seen anybody spend company time on the phone talking to their mother who lives in Colorado? Or they always have a pen in their pocket. Whenever they have a collection of 84 pens in their car. And or their daughter says, I need a bunch of paper to make a project. And whoop, a ream of paper goes out. Well, I figure they owe that to me. Stealing, shrinkage, they call it in the retailing industry. Things like that. After the great debacle, the early 2000s with the banking industry and the Great Depression, not the Great Depression, the Depression and recession and then depression that followed, banks are still, the financial sector still have a bad rap. And they can't seem to get out of it. Wells Fargo, my bank, was just recently rung up with big fines and problems for opening accounts for people that people didn't even know they had. They didn't want and didn't even know they had. They were just doing it to make certain numbers so they could make bonuses. But there are some sectors that people do trust more than others, of course. You can see in this slide, technology is trusted more than banks, and media more than banks. Most everybody more than banks. You can see the automotive sector is still pretty high. These are non-governmental organizations, but like Red Cross and things like that are NGOs. But technology, most people say they trust that, and it's just an interesting slide. It's from 2011, and I'll have some updated slides about that trust in business as we move along. And remember, the literature and research has shown that there's a distinct relationship between trust and commitment. Just like you with a friend or a loved one or a spouse or a significant other, you're more committed to someone if you can trust them. If you can't trust them, then they're probably not going to remain your friend. You're not going to be committed to the friendship or the marriage or the business relationship, right? So it's trust is important for commitment. Think about it from a consumer's viewpoint as well. Who wants to trade with a company they can't trust? Well, nobody does. So what are some examples? Misuse of company resources. Skip the second one. Abusive behavior. Harassment. Boy, is that in the news a lot with the hashtag #MeToo movement. Who knew that every male out there was harassing somebody? Accounting fraud, which ties back into bullet point 2. Conflicts of interest. Let me decline that. Defective products. Think about Firestone and Ford, going back a few years. Bribery and employee theft. So Dennis Kozlowski, I'm not going to click on this link, but it's a short piece on Dennis Kozlowski, who is a great story of how, and it links to accounting fraud, about how a good guy can go wrong when the way you view ethical situations becomes skewed. And the funny part, not the funny part, but the ironic part of the Dennis Kozlowski story, and Tyco is the name of the company, is that he was an accountant. His degree was in accounting. So it's hard to plead ignorance of accounting fraud when you're an accountant. Anyway, if you click on that link, it'll take you to a little 60 minutes piece. I think it's about 11, 12 minutes long. And you can really see how the mighty fell. He wasn't the first one to fall like that. Why do we study ethics? If you're a good person, it's not good enough. You need to be able to recognize when things are unethical. There are things that are unethical in your industry, in your workplace, that are not illegal. right? So you can't just say, well, I won't do anything that's illegal. Well, that's not good enough. You know, if you know it's your sister interviewing for a job and you're on the hiring committee, you should let them know that, by the way, that's my sister that's going to be interviewing on Tuesday. And if you want me to be in on the interview, that's fine. But obviously, I'm biased toward my sister, and you should disclose that. Um, if you are, we had a recent situation with the chief of the Environmental Protection Agency was renting a room in an apartment at a very below market rate from a person that lobbied the Environmental Protection Agency. So he did the administrator a favor by giving him a cheap place to live. Now, did he do him any favors? That'll all be found out. But does it look good? No. And remember, in life, perceptions are as important as reality, maybe even more important, the way things are perceived. Business ethics decisions can be complicated. Nearly all of life are shades of gray. There is very little black and white in the world. All right. You grow up with your parents and your teachers, in elementary school, maybe even high school. Oh, yes, there's black and white. This is always right. This is always wrong. Life's not like that. You have to navigate through it and realize, that might be legal and John does that, but I don't feel comfortable doing that. When you look in the mirror, you're just not comfortable about what you did. And it will happen. Now, in the 80s, which we'll come to that. We'll come to that in just a little bit. I'll tell you what. I'm going to not spend much time on this because you can read this on your own. This timeline of the 60s to the 2000s, I'm about to go over the next couple of slides, but that's a good recap, especially for quiz questions and hopefully test questions about different issues that arose and then how government and business reacted to it. So before the 1960s, we talk about, you may have heard, maybe you haven't, of the good Protestant work ethic. Hardworking guy or lady keeps their nose to the grindstone, always early for work, always stays late, does the job. That came about because the Protestants believed that, only some people were elect, that's what they call them, preordained or chosen to go on to greatness here and in the afterworld. And that's how they would earn it, by hard work, living right, and doing that. So there really wasn't a big talk of ethics in business. People just kind of tried to act right. And it was mostly in a theological realm, with Catholics having a view and Protestants having another view, similar in many respects. Catholics were interested in workers' rights, living wages, and Protestants were, concentrated on hard work. That's what made a person worthy. So you can see Catholicism teaches the good works are required as a necessary manifestation of the faith. And then the Protestants came along, and they didn't like anything that was. So the notion developed that it might be possible. I kind of misspoke that in the previous slide. Might be possible to tell who was elected or predestined. Were they hardworking? Were they frugal? Social success, wealth were thought of as important consequences of being the elect. So Protestants were attracted to these qualities, and they were always striving to reach them. So they were great employees, and because they were going to try to work this way, that way people would know that it was an outward sign that they were, elected for greatness. And then in the 60s, we had the Consumer Bill of Rights under Kennedy. Prior to the Consumer Bill of Rights, It was mostly, you probably learned this in economics class, a caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. In other words, if you buy it, good luck. I hope it doesn't kill you. It's up to you to figure that out before you buy it. And then, because of anti-business sentiment that came about, because of that, the Consumer Bill of Rights specified that you have a right to safety. In other words, if you buy a bar of soap and wash with it, it shouldn't kill you. That seemed reasonable. To be informed, and you notice that today package labeling is much more in depth than it was in 1961. There was very little in 1961. Now you know what's in it. You might know where it came from, who distributed it, how much, and if it's food, fat, calories, carbohydrate, sugar, all those things. That's an outgrowth of the Consumer Bill of Rights. You have the right to be able to choose what you want and to be heard. If you have a beef, you have the right to be heard. And there were some government entities set up on the state and the federal level that you could complain. You could complain to the Consumer Product Safety Commission and say, hey, I bought these toys for my kids and it killed all of them. I should have bought a Slinky. I'd still have children. You should be able to complain about it. That led to consumer protection groups. One of the most famous is Ralph Nader, who was involved in politics, still is to some degree, and he's around and about, and you can still see him on television, and he ran for president 2 cycles ago during the Bush v. Gore debacle. He ran as a third party candidate. But anyway, today, if you're 20 years old, you might think, who is this guy? And why is he always on there speaking up for the little guy? Well, he and his group of crusaders wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. It was about the Corvair, which this is a Corvair, a very cool car. Everybody wanted one. I want one today. It'd be great to have. But they did an expose of the automobile industry and realized that the automobile industry knew that this car was unsafe, but still sold it and sold large numbers of them. Today, if you don't buckle your seatbelt, noise goes off, and some cars even, you may not be able to crank it. When I was a kid, if we had a seatbelt, it was a lap belt. And, most of the time your crash protection was your mother reaching over fast enough to keep you from flying through the windshield. You hope that your mother had, good reflexes. Those were the safety components. Now I have airbags and everything else. All that came about not because just Ralph Nader, but he got it started. He was very famous for this book. And people were just shocked that businesses would sell products that were known to be unsafe, but they didn't declare it. So the Consumer Bill of Rights in 62, unsafe at any speed in 65. Now moving to the 70s, and professors began to write about social responsibility. And you have probably learned of by this, well, maybe not, of in business school we call CSR, corporate social responsibility. Businesses concerned with their public images. Or, corporate social responsibility is, we want to make a profit, but we don't want to pollute the river making our product in order to make a profit. In other words, you have a responsibility to society as well as your own stockholders and stakeholders. Now, there's an argument about that. Friedman argues that, businesses should only be concerned with following the laws and making profits. Pass those profits out to stockholders and stakeholders like employees, things, and let them donate to charity if they want to, or let them sponsor, the habitat house building. If a company does it, it's wrong because they only exist for one reason: to maximize shareholder wealth or maximize shareholder value. That's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is, let's say you have Ben and Jerry's and Starbucks and most every large reputable company to one degree or another, that you should try to do right. That's how it's developed today. In the 70s, that was just getting started. All right, so they're worried about false advertising or deceptive advertising and collusion and product safety and protection of the environment. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act came about in the 70s during the Carter administration, a famous Georgian, which we're going to talk about later on in chapter 3. But if you click on that link there, it's a map of the world. You can see what countries are really well known for bribing and what the bribing involves. And it's very interesting. I think you can spend as much little time on it as you want. I won't click on it here, but you can. But the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is Walmart was just prosecuted recently over there. They were bribing government officials, I believe, in Mexico or somewhere. If it wasn't Mexico, somewhere else, and maybe in South America, not North America, but I believe it was Mexico. The argument was that, well, that's the way they do business here. Well, the FCPA says that you have to do business elsewhere in the world like you do business here in the United States. You can't go to country X and they use slave labor, so we use slave labor. Well, no, it doesn't work. That's helped to show, the argument is that helps to show by example what people should do, and that American businesses don't do that. They don't use slave labor, and they try not to pollute the air and the water, and that's what you should do too, because it's good for business. In the 80s came along, and by God, that's why you have to take business ethics. There was, in addition to Dennis Kozlowski, but before him, there were other people. One of the more famous is Michael Milken. There was a lot of people started going to jail over financial shenanigans and business shenanigans. And these were high-profile trials, and it was kind of, there was a rash of them that all came like one after another, because the 80s were kind of a go-go period for mergers and acquisitions, and companies buying up other companies. If you go back, Dennis Kozlowski, Tyco bought up dozens of companies, none of them even related to one another. Pepsi bought all sorts of businesses. But anyway, so these guys were going to jail for being unethical business people, and the newspapers and televisions and government officials started looking, what do all these guys have in common? Well, unfortunately, they all earned MBAs. So they said, what in the world are we teaching people in MBA schools? Maybe we need to address that. Hence, courses on business ethics. And that's why you're forced to be with me here today. And it has helped a great deal, but no quality business program would offer a business degree without a course on ethics, because it became so out of hand and business got such a bad rap. They said, we need to teach our up-and-coming titans of industry and business school a bit about how to recognize ethical quandaries and how to deal with them. So in the 80s, they started establishing ethics committees in businesses, and companies started putting money behind it, training, teaching people. This is not acceptable. This is acceptable. Writing codes of ethics, things like that. And that's all. That all came about because so many business leaders got rung up by the courts. for being unethical. Then we move into the 90s. We still have, that was during the Reagan administration, those years, post Carter, pre George W. Bush, and ethics became a part of the business. They typically had ethics officers, and they studied ethics from the board of directors on down. Business still would rather self-regulate than be regulated by the government, right? They would rather say, "Oh no, we'll fix that. We'll do good. You don't need to come in here and tell us what to do," because it's easier to do that than to follow government regulations and laws. They don't like to be regulated at all, and most businesses, or all businesses, really like free trade. Hence, NAFTA came out of this period. The free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Canada and Mexico are our largest trading partners, of course, and us them. You don't have to really look it up at the Roberts Library. You just know it for this reason. I can drive something to Mexico and deliver it. I can drive something to Canada and deliver it. I can't drive something to China and deliver it. That's got to be flown or put on a boat. That's longer, harder, and more expensive. So we set up a NAFTA during the Clinton Gore administration to knock down some of those barriers so we could trade between three of us, and there's been fighting about it, since then. So now we move into where we are today. If you're an accounting major, you've probably heard of Sarbanes-Oxley. There continues to be businesses that don't operate correctly. So the legal structure and government structure and the business community thinks, well, maybe they do need to be regulated. We need some regulations. So after the big financial debacle, Sarbanes-Oxley came about, which said that that the financial statements have to be signed by the person in charge, indicating that to the best of their knowledge this is right and correct. Prior to that, they weren't. You also have to have somebody with accounting or financial knowledge on your board of directors, because previous to that it was just, hey, let me get my two buddies and we'll get them on the board of directors. We'll pay each other, and I'll be on the board of directors for their company, and we'll pay each other. And, we'll just rock along and have the accountants gen up some financial statements. We'll move along. That's where Sarbanes-Oxley came about, and also Dodd-Frank after all the big banking failures. So now part of Dodd-Frank actually was rolled back just this week, or in May of 2018. But anyway, that last line is very important. A firm's greatest danger is not discovering misconduct early. If you're a college football fan, you know that when a college discovers violations in their football program, they try to go to the NCAA first and go, hey, we just found this out. We want to self-declare and throw ourselves on the mercy of the court. Or it's like when you're about to get charged with something, and they go, and you say, look, rather than charge me for all that, how about I help you, and I'll tell you how it all works, and you can arrest the other guys and just give me a fine. If you find misconduct early, you can fix it, get rid of it. If not, then it can become so big, and by the time it is found out, think of Volkswagen and their diesel engines, where they were lying on what the emissions were. That went on for a while. You can be fined so much and get so much trouble in the courts, they can put you out of business. So, hence another reason for an ethics program. So, what's the culture? The culture of the company captures the values and norms that how an organization defines itself, and that starts from the top down. If the big boss person says this is the way that we need to operate, but operates a completely different way, it's not going to work. We don't have goal congruence in that. So if you think about training a dog or a kid, dogs are more fun, but hey, I've got one of both. You can do it two ways. to get your dog to do something, to train him to do a trick, you say, hey, do the trick. He doesn't do it. You beat him with a stick. Eventually, he might do the trick out of fear. But if you reward him with some kind of positivity, as you're training him, and he does a little bit of the trick, and you can reward him, you can get it done a lot quicker. So you want to minimize the need to have people marching around your company and watching everybody with cameras and personal inspections and all that. You want people to just act right and do the right thing, because it's just the culture of the company to do that, and teach them how to look at situations and how to avoid unethical situations, whether it be on expense reports or traveling on the company dime, or how to operate themselves. If you have a strong culture and everybody buys into it, then it's much easier. You don't have to have as much policing. Now, NAFTA, I just mentioned. The World Trade Organization, nations working together to establish standards of ethical behavior. Does Mexico regulate their polluting businesses as strictly as the United States does? No. Has that been a problem with NAFTA? Yes. Canada also helps their timber producers out more than the United States with subsidies. Is that a problem? Yes. There are problems in any agreement or pact. And you can see, I have down here what is mentioned in the presidential campaigns or in a presidential administration. But this past presidential campaign, it was the Pacific Trade Pact. I want to pull that up. NAFTA, I need to get rid of that. When you pull together with disparate countries and trade pacts and agree to some structure, it can help spread good behavior and make bad behavior better in other countries, because the goal is to lift everybody up to some higher operating level of ethical and corporate social responsibility behavior. Does it work in a straight line? No. Some people argue it doesn't work at all. But when the United States businesses carry to a country where we're not before, we bring a higher level of business operation savvy, and probably a little heightened sense of corporate social responsibility to employees and the planet. You can join groups, you see, and donate money and help and show what you're doing. So the main thing is, if you act right, all right, if you act right here, you make money here. That's the main reason to study ethics. All right. Because if you don't have to pay big fines, if Wells Fargo doesn't have to pay big fines to the government for ripping off consumers, they can keep those fines as profits. Employees don't turn over as much. They don't steal as much. Stealing, turnover. Investors will invest in your company, and they'll stay with you long term if they don't have to worry about the books being cooked all the time. And customers like to be associated with you because you're doing the right thing. A lot of companies that do this now. Bombas socks. If you buy a pair of socks, they give a pair to a homeless shelter. Or those ugly, horrible shoes that they give to shoeless people. And the name escapes me right now, but you all know exactly what I'm talking about. Tom's. So culture leads to profits. That's the main thing there. So employees are more satisfied. They don't turn over as much. Remember, it's cheaper to keep an employee than it is to hire a new one. Or in words of the old blues song, it's cheaper to keep her. That's just a rhythm and blues song, I guess. But if it's a good place to work, a safe place to work, uh, they get paid well, they have benefits, they're proud of where they work, they tell their friends, they don't want to leave. Somebody else offered, hey, I'll offer you an extra $1 an hour. No, I like where I'm at. So it's good for business in that respect. It's good for business with investors, like I already talked about. Uh, and the key one here is profitability. We can be the nicest people in the world, but if we don't make a profit, our business will not continue. So profits are always at the top of the chart. You have to make profits first before you can help people. But so you can follow the law, act ethically, make profits, then you can do other things. Unless you subscribe to Friedman, in which case you just pass down your employees and stockholders and let them do it, make their own choices. Customer satisfaction, again, being good can be profitable. So it might cost you money, a little money to be good, but the research indicates that it pays itself back. And that is the third bullet point here. Profits maximizes profitability. Can it be painful at times? Yes. But if you're a good corporate citizen, like Bombas or Tom's or Starbucks or any other, I bet there's different businesses that you do trade with because you like the way they act in the world. That increases your sales and return on investment. So, and a positive relationship between corporate citizenship and performance. So you take the course because it's required. AACSB requires the course because business school got a bad name on the shoulders of some guys that didn't act right. But it's important because doing the right thing and being socially responsible with your business and with your employees and being fair and just with everybody and learning to recognize where the law is and where the ethical decision, the unethical decision are, which can be in different places, is profitable, which ultimately that's what you're in business for, right? So that is an overview of chapter 1. And the author's version is posted as well. Happy reading and learning.